The first thing you should know about Wen Jiabao is that he is quite different from other Chinese leaders of the modern era. In China, his people have a nickname for him, Grandpa Wen. After this year's disastrous earthquake in Sichuan, he flew immediately to the devastated area, went out among the people to comfort them, met with many individually. He's more like an American politician than a Chinese apparatchik. He is also, of course, an agile politician inside the labyrinthine ranks of his own party. A geologist by training, he manages to push reform through without alienating his conservative opponents. There were some conditions to my interview with Premier Wen. My condition was that I be allowed to ask any questions I wished, which the Chinese accepted. One of theirs was that I not comment on or characterize the substance of the interview. So I won't, except to say that I thought it was the most open and frank conversation I had ever seen or read with a Chinese leader.
我还想跟你说一句。
Before we begin,
我一
I
定
would like
会
to let you know that I will use the words from the bottom of my heart
我讲的话
to answer your question, which means that I will tell the truth to all your questions.
I look forward to the chance for this dialogue, and I begin by thanking you for giving us the opportunity and the honor. The first thing I have to ask you, I think, is on many people's minds. What do you think of the current financial crisis affecting the United States? And does it make you think that the American model has many flaws in it that we are just recognizing now?
系统性的问题。
The crisis that occurred in the United States may have an impact that will affect the whole world.
美国发生的危机，
Nonetheless, in face of such a crisis, we must also be aware that today's world is different from the world that people lived in back in the 1930s.
现在的世界与30年代不同。
So this time, we should join hands and meet the crisis together.
共同应对这场危机，因为
If
美
the
国
financial and economic system in the United States go wrong,
它所带来的影响
then the impact will be felt not only in this country, but also in China, in Asia, and the world at large.
中国、亚洲，我已经高度地
I have noted the host of policies and measures adopted by the U.S. government
为了使局部危机
to prevent an isolated crisis from becoming a systematic one, and I hope that the measures and steps that they have adopted will pay off.
Do you think you can continue to grow if the United States goes into a major recession?
应该说，如果美国经济出现衰退，
A possible U.S. economic recession will certainly have an impact on the Chinese
因
economy.
为中美之间的贸易，
As we know that 10 years ago, the China-U.S. trade volume stood at only 102.6 billion U.S. dollars, while today the figure soared to 302 billion U.S. dollars, actually representing an increase of 1.5-fold.
如果美国
A shrinking of U.S. demand will certainly have an impact on China's export.
另外，美国的资金
And the U.S. finance is closely connected with the Chinese finance.
美国的金融
If anything goes wrong in the U.S. financial sector, then we are anxious about the safety and security of Chinese capital.
这也就是我开始说的。
That's why at the very beginning I've made it clear that the financial problems in this country not only concerns the interest of the United States, but also that of China and the world at large.
There is another sense in which we are interdependent. China is the largest holder of U.S. Treasury bills. By some accounts, you hold almost $1 trillion of it. It makes some Americans uneasy. Can you reassure them that China would never use this status as a weapon in some form?
我认为美国的实体经济
As I said, that we believe that the U.S. real economy is still solidly based, particularly in the high-tech industries and the basic industries. Now, something has gone wrong in the virtual economy, but if this problem is properly addressed, then it is still possible to stabilize the economy in this country. The Chinese government hopes very much that the U.S. side will be able to stabilize its economy and finance as quickly as possible. And we also hope to see sustained development in the United States, as that will benefit China.
我们当然关心自己资金的安全。
Of course, we are concerned about the safety and security of Chinese money here, but we believe that the United States is a credible country, and particularly at such difficult times, China has reached out to the United States. And actually, we believe such a helping hand will help stabilize the entire global economy and finance, and to prevent a major chaos from occurring in the global economic and financial system. I believe now cooperation is everything.
Premier, when your country has grown, as you pointed out, 9.5% for 30 years, fastest growth rate of any country in history. If people come to you and say to you, what is the Chinese model of succeeding as a developing country? What would you say what is the key to your success? What is the model?
改革开放极大的
By introducing reform and opening up, we have greatly emancipated productivity in China.
我们一个重要的观点
We have one important thought, that socialism can also practice market economy.
People think that's a contradiction. You have the market economy where the market allocates resources. In socialism, it's all central planning. How do you make both work?
我们完整
The complete formulation of our economic policy is to give full play to the basic role of market forces in allocating resources under the macroeconomic guidance and regulation of the government.
30年
We have one important piece of experience over the past 30 years, that is to ensure that both the visible hand and invisible hand
这两只
are given full play in regulating the market forces.
其实，如果你读过亚当·斯密的话，
If you are familiar with the classical works of Adam Smith, you will know that there are two famous works of his. One is The Wealth of Nations, the other is the book on the morality and
道德
ethics.
情操论。前者
And The Wealth of Nations deals more with the invisible hand, that is, that are the market
另
forces.
一方面，
And the other book deals with social equity and justice. And in the other book he wrote, he stressed the importance of playing the regulatory role of the
政府
government
的调节
to fairly distribute the wealth among the
公
people.
平地分配到每个人的手中。财富
If in the country most of the wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, then this country can hardly witness harmony and stability.
不稳。同样的情况，
The same approach also applies to the current U.S. economy. To address the current economic and financial problems in this country, we need to apply not only the visible hand but also the invisible hand.
China's onward rise has taken many forms, economic, cultural, and political. Naturally, it has had an increasingly active foreign policy, so far somewhat narrowly focused on securing China's interests. I spoke to Premier Wen about China's larger world role. Many people see China as a superpower already, and they wonder, why is it not being more active in political resolution of issues such as the issue of Darfur or the issue of Iran and its nuclear ambitions. There is a hope that China will play a role as a responsible stakeholder, to use Robert Zelek's phrase when he was Deputy Secretary of State, and that China will be more active in managing the political problems in the world, and that so far it has not been active. How would you react to that?
我首先要纠正
To answer this question, I need to correct some of the elements in your question first. China is not a superpower.
中国有13亿人口。
Although China has a population of 1.3 billion, and although in recent years China has registered fairly fast economic and social development since reform and opening up, China still has this problem of unbalanced development between different regions and between China's urban and rural areas. China remains a developing country.
我们还有
We still have 800 million farmers in rural areas,
贫困人口，
and we still have dozens of million people living in poverty.
吃低保的。
To address our own problems, we need to do a great deal. China is not a superpower. That's why we need to focus on our own development and on our efforts to improve people's lives.
But surely the Chinese government could pressure the Sudanese government or the Iranian government or the government in Burma to be less repressive. You have relations with all three of them.
我现在回答你的第二个问题。
That brings me to your second question.
其实，中国在国际社会上
Actually, in the international community, China is a justice upholding country. We never trade our principles.
做交易。就拿你提出的达尔富尔问题来讲，
Take the Darfur issue that you raised just now, for example. China has always advocated that we need to adopt a dual-track approach to seek a solution to the Darfur issue.
中国是最早向达尔富尔
China was among the first countries that sending peacekeepers to Darfur.
也是最早
China was also the first country that gave assistance to Sudan.
我们在不断
And we also keep our efforts to engage the leaders in Sudan
苏丹问题
to try to seek a peaceful solution to the issue as quickly as possible.
Do you think it would be dangerous for the world if Iran got nuclear weapons? And what do you think the world should do to try to stop that possibility?
我们不赞成伊朗拥有核武器。
We are not supportive of a nuclearized Iran. We believe that Iran has the right to develop the utilization of nuclear energy in a peaceful
国
way.
际原子能组织的监督，
But such efforts should be subject to the safeguards of the IAEA, and Iran should not develop nuclear
因此在
weapons.
伊核问题
As far as the Iranian nuclear issue is concerned, China's stance is clear-cut.
但是我们希望通过
Nonetheless, we hope that we can use peaceful talks to achieve the purpose rather than resort to the willful use of force or the intimidation of force.
这就同
It's like treating the relationship between two individuals. If one individual tries to corner the other, then the effect will be counterproductive. That will do nothing in helping resolve the problem. Our purpose is to resolve the problem, not to escalate tensions.
那我反过来
And
问
I also have a question for you. Don't you think that the efforts made by China in resolving the Korean nuclear issue and the position we have adopted in this regard have actually helped the situation on the Korean peninsula move for the better day by day? And of course, I know that it still takes time to seek a thorough and complete solution to the Korean nuclear issue, and on that basis to help put in place security and stability in Northeast Asia. But what I would like to stress is that the model that we have adopted and the efforts we have made prove to be right in this direction.
Since you honored me by asking the question, I will say to you, Premier, that China's efforts in North Korea have been appreciated in the United States and around the world. And of course, it makes people wish that China would be active in other areas in just the same productive way that it was in North Korea, because we see that it produces results.
经历
We have gained a lot of experience and learned lessons from years of negotiations concerning the six-party talks. And the progress made in the six-party talks also has a lot to do with the close cooperation among the six parties.
In my conversation with Wen Jiabao, China's premier, one of the most complex and controversial subjects was the discussion of democracy. Wen has deep experience with the issue. In 1989, he was one of the Communist Party officials who went to Tiananmen Square to talk to the protesters. I asked him whether that experience had made him want to slow down or stop political reform. Listen to what he had to say. I will take advantage of your kindness and ask a question that many people around the world wonder about. There is a very famous photograph of you at Tiananmen Square in 1989. What lesson did you take from your experiences in dealing with that problem in 1989?
我觉得我们国家
I believe that while moving ahead with the economic reforms, we also need to advance political reforms.
必须继续推进政治体制改革。
As our development is comprehensive in nature,
我们的发展应该是全面的发
our
展，
reform should also be
我们的
comprehensive.
改革也应该是全面的改革。其实你的问题
I think the core of your question is about the development of democracy in China.
我以为
I believe when it comes to the development of democracy in China,
无外乎在三
we
个
talk about progress to be made in 3 areas.
第一，
Number 1,
要逐步完善
we need to gradually improve the democratic election system
使
so that the state power will truly belong to the people
真正属于人民。
and state power will be used to serve the people.
第二，
Number 2, we need to improve the legal system, run the country according to law, and establish the country under the rule of law. And we need to build an independent and just judicial system.
第三，
Number 3, government should be subject to oversight
群众的监督。
by the people, and that will call on us to increase transparency in government affairs.
特别是
And particularly, it is also necessary for government to accept oversight by the news media and other parties.
When I go to China and I'm in the hotel, and if I type in the words Tiananmen Square in my computer, I get a firewall, what some people call the Great Firewall of China. Can you be an advanced society if you don't have freedom of information to find out information on the internet?
中国的互联网
China now has over 200 million internet users,
中国互联网的
and the
自由
freedom of internet in China is recognized by many, even from the West.
许多人所公认的。
Nonetheless, to uphold state security, China, like many countries in the world, has also imposed some proper
采
restrictions.
取必要的限制。
And that is for the safety, that is for the overall safety of the country and for the freedom of the majority of the people.
我也可以告诉你，你可以在
I can also tell you that on the internet in China,
看到许多直接
you can have access to a lot of postings that are quite critical about the government.
了解情况。
I frequently browse the internet.
What are your favorite sites?
I browsed a lot of internet websites.
May I ask you about another set of possible talks? The Dalai Lama has said now, it appears, that he would accept China's rule in Tibet. He accepts the socialist system in Tibet, and what he asks for is cultural autonomy and a certain degree of political autonomy. The talks apparently are stuck at a lower level between the Tibetans and the Chinese government. Why don't you, given your power and your negotiating skills, take the issue yourself, and you or President Hu Jintao were to negotiate directly with the Dalai Lama and solve this issue once and for all for the benefit of the Chinese people and of course the Tibetan people who are also in China?
他在世界许多地
In
方
many places all over the world, the Dalai Lama keeps preaching about the idea of the so-called autonomy in the Greater Tibetan region.
要利用宗教
And actually, the so-called autonomy that he pursues is actually to use religion to intervene in politics.
很多美国人
And they want to separate the so-called Greater Tibetan region from the motherland.
大张旗包
And many people in the United States have no idea how big is the so-called Greater Tibetan region.
云南
The so-called Greater Tibetan region, preached by the Dalai Lama, actually covers Tibet, Sichuan, Yunnan, Qinghai, and Gansu, altogether 5 provinces. And the area covered by this so-called Greater Tibetan region accounts for a quarter of China's territory.
几十年来，我们对
For decades, our policy towards the Dalai Lama remains unchanged.
只要他承
That
认
is, as long as the Dalai Lama is willing to recognize that the Tibet is an inalienable part of China's territory, and as long as the Dalai Lama gives up his separatist activities, we are willing to have contact and talks with him or his representatives.
这种商谈的
Now,
结果
sincerity holds the key to producing result out of the talks.
What action would you like to see from the Dalai Lama that would show sincerity?
其实
Actually, I already made it clear that when we observe any individual, the Dalai Lama included, we should not only we should not only observe what he says, but also watch what he does.
他的诚意
His sincerity can be demonstrated in giving up separatist activities.
那个时候
But then, everything depends on the development of the situation.
China's Premier Wen Jiabao is a reading man and a poet, and I asked him about something he was reading. You have said that you have read the works of Marcus Aurelius 100 times. Marcus Aurelius is a famous Stoic philosopher. My reading of him says that one should not be involved in the self and in any kind of pursuits that are self-interested, but should be more for the community as a whole. When I go to China these days, I'm struck by how much individualism there is, how much consumerism there is. Are you trying to send a signal to the Chinese people to think less about themselves and more about the community?
我是说过，我曾多次读过
It is true, I did read the meditations written by Marcus Aurelius Antonio on many occasions, and I was very deeply impressed by the words that he wrote in the book to the effect
所谓赫赫一时的人物，
that where are those people who were great for a time? They are all gone, leaving only a story, or some even just half a story.
有的连一个故事还不是，只是半个故事。
So I draw the conclusion that only people are in the position to create history and write history.
创造历史，并且书写历史的，只有人民。我十分重视道德。
I very much value morality, and I do believe that entrepreneurs, economists, and statesmen alike should pay much more attention to morality and ethics.
在我的思想里，道德最高。
In my mind, the highest standard to measure the ethics and morality is justice.
我们在经济发展中，
It is true, in the course of China's economic development, some companies have actually pursued their profits at the expense of morality,
因此我们绝不
and we will never allow such things to happen.
丧失道德来发展经济，因为呢，注定是不会持久的。
We will not allow economic growth at the expense of the loss of morality, because such approach simply cannot sustain.
因此，我们提倡要有企业道德，
That's why we advocate corporate, occupational, and social ethics.
You've talked about elections many times. Do you think in 25 years there will be national elections in which there will be a competition? There will be perhaps two parties running for the positions such as your own?
25年以后的事情，我很难预见。
It's hard for me to predict what will happen in 25 years' time.
我认为中国的民主政治
This being said, I have this conviction that China's democracy will continue to grow.
再过20-30年，
In 20 to 30 years' time, the whole Chinese society will be more democratic and fairer, and the legal system in China will further be improved. The socialism, as we see it, will further mature and improve.
会更加公正。
On that happy note, I thank you, Your Excellency. I'm sure your people are worried that we've taken a little bit extra time, and I thank you in advance for your kindness and your frankness.